So if we need 100 people for 5 years in total, how many millions of dollars do you need? This was back in 2008. I was interviewing for my very first associate producer job. And I remember being asked, so what do you think production is? I didn't really have an idea of what production was.
So people may be familiar with film production and not so much with game production. Could you tell our audience, what do game producers do?
Oh, of course. That's a very common question. And the funny thing is, I'm getting flashbacks of my very first job as a game producer. This was back in 2008. I was interviewing for my very first associate producer job. And I remember being asked, so what do you think production is? I didn't really have an idea of what production was. But that was what? That was 16 years ago. So now I actually have a definition. I have an explanation of what a producer does. I like to say that game producers, they do the important but unsexy work that most other people generally don't want to do. Like monitoring, keeping track of progress, keeping track of the schedule, keeping track of scope and the budget. You know, like game developers, typically when they hear, oh, we got to talk about the budget, or we need a spreadsheet to do number crunching for the budget, and then we need a Gantt chart, and we need charts that show the schedule. People, their eyes glaze over. But that's why producers are important. We like, if not feel passionate about keeping track of, again, all those things: scope, schedule, task tracking, budget. Another way that I like to explain it is, obviously in a game dev team, you have all the creative folks. Game designers, your writers, your programmers, your artists, the audio engineers, everyone who should be focused on creating something. Good producers should be passionate about taking responsibility or taking ownership of the work that would be important, but it would be a distraction for the creatives. So again, the creative folks, they should focus on actually creating, on writing code, on designing systems, writing quests, creating all the beautiful art that will be in the game. All that stuff, they should be focused on creating, but all the other work that isn't creating, that's where the producers come in. Like, for example, let's call them big distractions as well as little distractions. Like, for example, a lot of producers will be dealing with some sort of task tracking program. A lot of AAA companies use Jira. Any producer knows what Jira is. A lot of smaller studios or a lot of smaller dev teams might use something like Trello or ClickUp or Notion, or it's even something as rudimentary or simple as like an Excel sheet. Just a place where you can keep track of what the current tasks are. Cleaning up the Jira board or the Trello board, it's important and it's time consuming, but again, it's a distraction from the creatives. Because as you can imagine, like every minute or every hour, every day, an artist or a programmer or a designer is doing cleaning up a Jira board or working on a budget. They're not doing work creating. That's where the producers come in. We do the work that would mostly be a distraction for the creatives. We take ownership of that so that creatives can focus on creating what they need to make a game as fun and as beautiful as it can be.
Wow, I like people stepping up and helping people. Wow. Could you walk us through the process of starting and finishing a AAA from the standpoint of game production?
Ooh. So for AAA, okay, so this is going to be like oversimplification. So as a producer, I think we tend to look at, really not only AAA, but any kind of game project, we look at a lot of things. We look at it in phases. Again, this applies to any kind of game project, but let's talk specifically about AAA. The very first phase is your ideation. Well, let's call the very first phase pre-production. So, and pre-production, like the very first part of the very first phase would be ideation. It's like when you and your team, mostly it's the lead designer or the creative director or, whoever's in charge of the creative who tries to figure out what kind of game are you gonna make. So is it gonna be a big game? Is it gonna be a small game? Is it an open world exploration game? Is it a linear shooter? Whatever. So ideation, so the very first thing that any game project starts with. And then the rest of pre-production, a lot of it centers around asking those early questions. One, what is the game we're gonna make? Next, you start prototyping. You start making like really simple and kind of ugly, as quickly as you can, let's call them quick and dirty, playable builds. The point of prototyping, I should say, is to answer a question, okay, well, the game that we're thinking about making, is it actually fun? So the prototypes, as you're playing these rough and dirty, small, ugly builds, they should at least be playable enough to answer that question. Is our game idea, is it fun? Does this feel interesting? Does it feel compelling? So that's prototyping. And like I said, that's all part of the pre-production stage. I guess the last big chunk of pre-production is figuring out what is the team and what are the resources we need to make the game that we have planned. A lot of it's documentation, but basically it's a lot of figuring out what kind of team do we need, how big of a team do we need, what disciplines or what skills do we need. Obviously, designers, programmers, engineers, artists, 2D artists, 3D artists, concept artists, all the audio folks, QA. So you figure out everybody that you'll need for the project. One other last step is figure out, okay, well, we need X number of people. How much money is it gonna cost to hire all these people? And we think it's gonna take 5 years, 6 years. So if we need 100 people for 5 years, and then everybody is going to be paid this amount in total, how many millions of dollars do you need to finish it? So anyway, like I know I'm rambling, but all that is figured out in pre-production. What kind of game are you going to make? Is our idea, is it fun? And then finally, how big of a team do we need? What are the skill sets we need? How much time, how many years do we need to make it? How much money do we need to make it? And then, then you have a basic plan. And then the next major phase is production. All the planning that you engaged in pre-production, you actually execute during the production phase. Pre-production might take a few years. Production will definitely take several years. After you go through the planning and pre-production, after you go through the production phase, actually making the game, designing the levels, creating the art, writing all the code, engineering all the infrastructure, getting the game to work, doing all the audio, testing it, fixing bugs. So after years of production, years of actually making the game, eventually and hopefully you get to version 1.0, a game that's good enough to sell, that's good enough to release to the public. Again, that's like an oversimplification, but like overall, you start with pre-production, you go into production, and then assuming everything goes well, at the end you have a game that a lot of people will agree, okay, well, I want to buy that.